Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are joined by James McCorkill. He has written a fantasy book called Eruption that has to do with a small asteroid that gets past the defenses and causes all sorts of chaos as it slams into Yellowstone National Park, causing a large eruption, which we already have to live in fear of anyway. So, this should be rather interesting, but welcome, James, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good, good, good. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to write this book?
Well, I'm a retired federal firefighter from Washington State, and I started writing back in 2002 and met a famous horror writer named Hugh B. Cave, who became my mentor. Anyway, I kind of did a lot of writing off and on for quite a while, and then this latest book, I decided to get away from this. I wrote the Alice Cave series. It was a 7-book series. And I ended the series and I needed to start a new story. And I decided to do a standalone, which became Eruption. And so I wrote that and published it. And then, wouldn't you know, about 2 months later, Michael Crichton's wife got a hold of James Patterson, that he had written a book called Eruption that he never finished. And so Cameron finished it for him, and they published it 2 months after mine, called Eruption 2. So you got the two books out there, both named Eruption, coming out at the same time. So
Yeah.
the nice part is I'm getting a lot of free advertising from him.
Well, see, it's not all bad then.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
Yes. Yeah, so how and why did you start writing?
I mean, from the beginning,
Yes.
when I first started, like I say, I was a federal firefighter. I did a lot of reading in my spare time, and I come across these stories, and I kept thinking, man, I can write a better story than that. So I decided to start writing a little story, and finally, people started taking interest in it. Some of my fellow firefighters, and so I got a hold of a lady down at the local bookstore and asked how you go about getting it published. She said there's a famous horror writer that lived on the island named Hugh B. Cave. She got a hold of him and he agreed to meet with me. So I took over my story with me and went over to meet him and his wife. And he said, you got a lot of talent, but your grammar is terrible. So I had to learn grammar all over again. So I started writing, working with him, and he taught me a lot of tricks of the trade and stuff. And then I wrote the first novel called Dead Energy. And the idea came from one of my fellow firefighters. This is back in the 80s, almost the 90s, when we were having all the oil crisis. And he said, wouldn't it be interesting if all of a sudden there was no oil anywhere? And it clicked an idea in my head. And I go, wow, that would make a great story. So I started working on a story and got quite a ways through it. And then I went over and met Hugh Cave and his wife. And he went ahead and he gave me a lot of points and suggestions and stuff on how to make it a good story. And so I wrote that. And then my wife was dying of cancer in 2002, and she wanted to see me publish it before she passed away. So I rushed the ending for it. This was just when self-publishing was coming out. I don't know if you remember, but Stephen King did his first computer book where you can read it on the computer. And that was the same time that I started doing my story. So I went ahead and did mine on the computer too, and rushed it to get it done, and then self-published it and printed 12 copies. My wife was happy. She got to see it published. She loved the story, except didn't like the ending. And so and everybody else that read it didn't like the ending either. So after she passed away, I kind of gave up on writing. And then I retired and moved out here to North Carolina. And somehow one copy of those 12 books ended up out here at a garage sale. Some lady found it. And I was down at the Shoes DVD store, and she heard my name, and she goes, are you the writer? And I go, well, I wrote one book. She goes, I read it. That was a great story, except I didn't like the ending. And I go, what? How'd you get it? She said, I found it at a garage sale clear out here in North Carolina. So anyway, she asked me if I still wrote, and I said, no, I drink now. She says, you got to get back to writing. I didn't like the ending, but I liked the story. So anyway, I went ahead and tried writing, redoing it, and being hungover all the time and everything. I couldn't get any writing done. Nothing looked good and everything. So they finally said, well, look, your liver's going bad. You got to quit drinking. And so I did. I quit drinking and started working on the story and wrote a new ending for it. And then being sober, all of a sudden I come up with all these ideas. And I thought, wow, I can make this into a great series. So I went ahead and did it, wrote the ending with the idea of doing more books in the series. And sure enough, it took off and everybody really liked it. And so I went ahead and So I get some great reviews. So that's when I started the series, did the next book, and I really liked it. So I went on the next book and ended up with 7 books in the series. I ended the series this last year because the main character, Alex Cave, he's getting too old and he can't do the things he's supposed to do in the stories. So I went ahead and wrote the last book, fading him out of the story, and then I started this new one, Eruption, as a standalone, and that's why I got started writing. So,
Oh, that's fantastic. So why don't you tell us of the basic plot outline of Eruption, what happens and how it goes?
okay, basically, like I said in the opening, an asteroid hits Yellowstone National Park. It doesn't cause a super eruption like normally would happen if it erupted by itself. It does cause enough eruption to where it's spewing ash all over, and it's spreading across the eastern part of the United States. Well, when this happens, the president activates what they call the walnut scenario, to where the underground facility set up for emergencies like this. They can all these people be invited to go in this underground complex and survive any apocalypse that's coming. So he activates that, and that gets this doctor, and his family involved. They call him, and he gets his kids out of school, and they take off trying to make it to this secret facility. In the meantime, the main character in the story, Marcus Hunter, he's a retired volcanologist, and he's got this big sailboat, and he gets his grand getting into trouble. She's 14 years old, living with her grandparents, and she's getting into trouble and stuff. So he files custody papers and gets her and decides to take her on this trip on his boat. Invites his other daughter and her daughter along with him. So and she doesn't want to go. She hates being there. She feels like she can't get any reception on her phone, and her world is just completely going crazy. And she hates him and hates everything about the trip. Well, as they go on, she starts learning more about the family and starts finding out that, well, this is not so bad after all. And along the way, they meet well, anyway, while that's happening, the people on the International Space Station are watching what's happening with the Yellowstone volcano, and they want to get out of there. They get permission to leave in the escape capsule. While they're heading for the escape capsule, all of a sudden they get bombarded by micrometeorites, and it starts tearing up space or the International Space Station. And only 2 people make it off the escape capsule. They splash land in the Pacific Ocean, and wouldn't you know it, Marcus Hunter and his family are there, and they see him come down, and they go over and rescue him. And then they learn that Yellowstone has erupted, and they didn't know anything about it. And so they're headed south to get away from the northern hemisphere. On the way, they meet pirates that try to take over their ship and steal it. And then also, they get down, he's had this plastic bottle on his bookshelf for years, and he got it from an old lady he met in Peru. She told him it was magic water and not to drink it. Well, while he's on this trip taking these people south, all of a sudden the water is gone out of the bottle, and they see a scroll is in there. And so they take it out, and it's a map. And they follow the map, and it takes them to this river that you can only find if you have the map. And so they hit up the river, and they have all kinds of things going on while they're going upriver. And then in the meantime, the other families, they're going through the ashes trying to get to this facility. They run into all kinds of problems. People starting to steal their money, and they have to get in a firefight with people, and they're having a hard time making this facility because everybody's trying to kill them and get there themselves. And so that's happening on one side of the story. And then on the other side of the story, of course, you got Marcus headed upriver. And they get upriver, and they find this ancient society living underneath the Tranador volcano. And they're modern. I mean, they live like they're like they, in skin clothing and all that kind of stuff. But underground, they have this supercomputer. And they're a very smart, intelligent race, come to find out. And so I don't know. The story goes on and on. There's quite a bit to it, quite a bit of different things that happen over the story. I don't want to give too much of it away, but there's a lot of things going on. You got the family trying to make it to survive, and then you got Marcus trying to find this ancient society. Well, in the end, the ancient society ends up giving Marcus the idea of how to stop the eruptions and stop the volcanoes. But I won't go into more detail on that, on how he does it. I'm trying not to give away too much of the story.
Wow, I mean, yes, that's very fascinating. So how did you come up with this idea? It seems a little bit unusual.
I don't know. I just get these weird ideas. And I say, oh, I can make a good story out of that. And then I start working on it, and it kind of develops as I go along. I don't plot everything out ahead of time. I'm more of a pantser. I write as I go, and that makes for a lot more rewrites, but it makes for some interesting stories. So
Yeah, no, certainly. So what are you reading right now?
I don't read. I find I have a problem. If I read other people's stuff while I'm working, I tend to incorporate their stuff and their style into mine. I found this out when I first started working on the first story. I was reading other books while I was writing it, and people that were following my story, they were saying, "Hey, all of a sudden you changed your whole style. What's going on?" I go, "What?" And I found out that when I involve the story, it just screws up my style and my thinking and stuff. So I had to give up reading other people's stuff while I'm writing. Every once in a while, I'll go through a phase where I don't have any ideas, and I'll read somebody's story. But then I got to give it some time before I actually get back to my story, or else I start incorporating their style into mine. It's a weird thing I have, and I don't know why. So
Yeah, no, I
that's
I
right.
understand. I have a bit of a similar problem. I also I don't know, it also kind of starts to screw up, the plot and different things. Like I will read other stuff too, um, if I'm looking for structure or whatever have you, but then I have to not engage for a long time and then go back and do it again. So
Right.
it's yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Otherwise it's like sometimes I'll use this reference material for like, oh, I really like how this dialogue was done. Let me see that format or how that was spelled or that sort of thing again. But yes, I suffer from a similar issue where, if I'm reading a lot of X author, everything starts to sound like that, and that's not what my readers signed up to read. So it's
Right.
so um yes, I definitely understand that. So are you going to continue with this idea, or is this going to be a standalone unlike your previous series?
It's going to be a standalone. I've got all these stories on my computer that I've started years ago, or just recently, or I'm working on something. I'll give it an idea and I'll set it aside. And so all of a sudden I'll get an idea of this old story I was working on, and I'll start on an idea for that one. And that's what's happened now. As soon as I finish Eruption, I gave it about 2 weeks off, and then all of a sudden I was going through my other stuff, and I saw this idea I had a long time ago. I thought, oh man, that would make a great story. And so now I'm working on a new story, but it'll be standalone too. I don't know if I'll do any more series. That's pretty involved, keeping track of everything. When you're doing a series like that, you got so many different characters doing so many different things. It gets kind of confusing towards the end, even for an author. So I think I'll do another standalone next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That definitely makes sense. And it seems like, I don't know, are you do you um as far as genre goes, do you kind of stay in like fantasy, sci-fi, thriller, or do you write other things?
No, I stay with the sci-fi mystery type thing, mystery thriller. They're not really fantasies. And the other stories, they're all the same thing. They're action adventure with a sci-fi twist to it, basically. They're things that can happen right here and now, but just a little sci-fi twist in it. And so they're basically action adventure. And I like that. I like keeping everything fast paced, keep it moving along. Um, I and well, anyway, I've heard some comments about the Michael Crichton Patterson eruption, and I won't go into any details about that. But um, anyway, after reading some of the stuff they wrote about him, I thought, okay, I'm going to I'm going to stick to my stuff and do it the way I do it. And um, I don't know if you read some of the reviews on his eruption. Some of them are great, and some of them are really disappointed. So it's one of those things. You always got the people who like him and people who don't. Even mine, I've got one person who didn't like it so far, but everybody else seems to like it. But one person, they said, well, there's not enough volcano action in it. And you read the reviews on Patterson's, and they said there's too much volcano in it. It's nothing but volcano action. So you never know. Everybody has a different
Yes.
idea.
Well, perhaps they should balance it out by reading your book in the left hand and the Patterson book in the right hand, and they'll have just the right amount.
Yeah. Interesting thing that happened after when Patterson's first came out. All of a sudden, Amazon contacted me. I mean, my book's been out there for like a couple of months, and all of a sudden they contacted me and they said, "Hey, we need written proof that you have the rights to use this cover that you're using." And I go, what? You never said anything before. And they said, well, no, you need to prove that you have the rights or we're going to cancel your account. I thought it was pretty odd that as soon as Cameron's came out, the next day they hit me up about the cover. Well, then we got that straightened all out and everything, but I just thought it kind of odd, that all of a sudden Amazon decides to look at my cover when they didn't for 2 months. So I'm wondering, well, maybe somebody on the James Cameron crew, maybe they saw that my book was there and they thought it was competition, so they were, I don't know. I have no idea. It'd be
Well,
nice if people would
there's
read
a
the
lot
two
of
books
scams
together.
and things in the Amazon world, so they have to chase down a lot of stuff. But
Oh,
it's yes. So you were in Washington State for all that time fighting fires and all this type of thing, and then moved to North Carolina. What a change.
yeah, well, my wife passed away. She didn't make it. And then I suffered a bad injury on the job and was forced to go out on disability. And my brother lives in Pensacola, but him and his wife rented a cabin up here in Franklin, North Carolina. And they told me about it. And they said, you got to see this country up here. It's beautiful and not near as much rain as Washington. So I came out to check it out and I fell in love with it. It's just gorgeous. We're here where I am in the mountains and the rain. Sure, you get downpours, but then they stop. Where in Washington, it rains for like days on end. And so it's so nice to be up here. And so I went ahead and sold my place and moved out here. And been here since 2005.
Oh, very nice. Yes, I remember when I lived in Seattle for 10 years,
Oh, did you? Okay.
and I was in Denver once, and someone in my family, he's like, so they do tech stuff, and they said we track the weather in your area. He's kind of like, we saw, and they're from Denver where it's very dry. We saw it rained every day for 3 weeks. And I'm kind of like, mm-hmm. Like every day for 3 weeks. Yeah, yeah, that is a
Yep.
thing that happens. Yeah,
Yep.
yes, that's how we live. We're all 2 seconds away from flooding at any moment, sort of thing, by a boat.
Right.
Um, and they were just absolutely gobsmacked, continuous rain for 3 weeks. And it's like, yeah, there's not many spots in the country where you'll get that, but that's what you live when you live in a temperate rainforest. A lot of rain. So it's yes, I also live on the East Coast now, and I can't say that I miss that aspect of it. There's lots of things at the Pacific Northwest I miss, but the daily rain is not one of them. So
Right. I
yes,
grew up on one of the islands up there, Orcas Island at San Juan's. Or those San Juan Islands up there in
yes,
Washington. I grew up on well, eighth grade through high school on Orcas, and we're kind of a banana belt there. We got about 1/10 the rainfall that the mainland does. Somehow the mountains coming over the Olympic mountain range, the clouds coming over, they swirl around and head south. They don't head over us. So it was really nice up there. But then, of course, I lived down in Whidbey Island, closer to Everett, which we used to call Everwet. And so I got a lot more rain there on Whidbey Island while I was there. But it wasn't,
yes,
yeah. So it was nice
yes.
to get away
I
from.
made the trek up to Orcas Island one time to go to a retreat center called Indralaya, and it was lovely up there. I would live up there in a second. So. It's the only problem is it's very far away and it's a very long ferry ride. If you're going to be out there, you got to be willing to be out there and stay put. Like, you can't
Right.
be going around a lot. So it's yeah, it's a lot of it, but it is a very, very lovely place. So, in all of I'm kind of surprised, being that you were a firefighter, have you written any books on fires? Like,
No,
that
no.
that just seems so counterintuitive.
I know. Everybody says that. Well, why don't you write one about fires? I said, well, how much science fiction can you make out of a firefight? you know, I mean, I can't think of any ideas where it would fit into what I
I
like to
don't
write.
know. Weather machine gone wrong. Rogue firefighter sets the forest on fire, burns down half the West. I don't know. Like, it just seems odd that no books on
I
fire.
know.
It seems like that'd be a natural place to start.
Yeah. Well, I was an electronic technician and electrician for years before that, before I was a firefighter. In fact, I was the electrician at Yellowstone National Park one summer too. I just turned 21. Oh man, what a great year that was. So I was single, and but I was an electrician there, and then I worked at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard for 3 years, civil service, and then worked in Reno, Nevada for about 6 years as an electrician for the FAA. Then I went back to Whidbey Island or Washington State, and then I got a job as an electrician there at Whidbey Island. And when they contracted our jobs out, they offered us, they said, "Do you have any other training?" I said, "Well, I know firefighting." So I learned that in the Navy. And they said, "Oh, well, we got a job opening if you want to transfer to firefighter." I said, "Sure, instead of getting fired, you bet." So I became a firefighter and then did that for 32 years and until I got hurt on the job. And then I was only 4 years from full retirement when I got injured, and there was just no way I could go back to work as a full-time firefighter. So I ended up going on a disability. And then when I moved out here, and then a few years later, I started writing again, and that's what I do now. So
Yes. Well, have you found a replacement for the late Mrs. Corkill?
no, well, she was my second wife, but she was really my soulmate. I've met a few girls and I've gone on a few dates and stuff, but I just haven't found anybody like her. I just can't quite. I don't know. Maybe my standards are too high, or I don't know.
That's a credit to her.
I
She's
was
a hard
married for
act to
34 years
follow.
total. So. What's that?
Yeah. No, that's a credit to her. Hard act to follow.
Like I say, I did 34 years total marriage, and I thought, well, I don't need to get married right away again. I did my share of marriage.
Yes,
So,
no, that certainly makes sense. Well, we've reached the point of the show where we do plugs and let people know where they can buy the book and where they can keep up with you online. So why don't you let everybody know where to get the book and how to follow you on social media and whatnot?
the book is available everywhere: Amazon, Kobo, Sony. I'm self-published, but I got my hands in all the different outlets where you can get them. They're available paperbacks, ebooks, and of course hard copies. My website I'm working on right now, but it's jamescorkill.com. I've got a couple problems with it right now, but you can still go there and check me out.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Good, good, good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy getting to spend some time talking about fiction with people and all that sort of thing. And yes, your whole journey is absolutely fascinating. So
Thank you.
yeah, it's really cool. So thank you so much for coming on the show. That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.